With Necropolis drawing to a close, I think it's time to do my 3.24 build recap. We're going to talk about the best and worst of 3.24 for me. We're also going to be doing some meaningless ranking of my builds, so make sure you go down and comment about how I'm wrong about each score. I played way fewer builds this league than in past leagues, and that's for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's because Necropolis just didn't really grip me that much, and I wasn't having that much fun. So being creative when you're not having fun is difficult. But number two, it's because I found one of the best builds I've ever made. So stay tuned. So my first build was my league starter, and that was Ice Trap of Hollowness Trickster. The goal for this build was to basically get a Sunblast as early as I could. I ended up getting one in the Axe for about 9 Chaos, and then just blasting through the Atlas and getting all 4 of my Voidstones. This build handled that phenomenally. I had a blast. There's one downside to this build, and it's visibility. The ice traps are massive. They cover the entire screen, which is great for clear, but the white brightness is a flashbang that is challenging to deal with for some people. Gearing this character up was very smooth. I took down the first 2 Voidstones on basically 10 or 20 C, and then very smoothly was able to take down Uber Elder and Maven. Trickster is phenomenal for the Uber Elder fight with dealing with its slows, and the amount of screen coverage that you get makes it so that ads that pop up in these fights are killed instantly, even off screen. The Ice Trap start was one of the smoothest I've ever had. Probably one of the fastest to 4 Voidstones for the least amount of effort. This build gets an 8.7, but took down every single map in the Atlas, all 4 Voidstones, and then decided that I was ready to do some serious speed mapping. Usually when I start with a build that is good at bossing, my next build has to be a mapper, and there are a few better mappers that I've played per divine of budget than the Power Siphon Deadeye. Power Siphon is a skill that was reworked 2 leagues ago so that its initial projectiles are always fired even with the use of Fury Valve. So at level 21, Power Siphon is firing 8 projectiles targeted at nearby enemies. Each enemy that is struck by a projectile will have those projectiles split into all additional projectiles that you have. So the Fury Valve Amulet gives 2, Deadeye gives 2. So all 8 enemies that you hit then split to 4 additional enemies. That is a lot of projectiles on the screen. It makes it so your instant leech and any life gain on hit you have gives you an absurd amount of recovery. Our life pool was always topped off, even in battle, and that leads to ES. How do we deal with Energy Shield? This build ended up with about 1300 and recouped it with the Graven's Secret Belt. So Power Siphon needs to stack power charges in order to get its critical strike chance and extra multi. So we got 10 power charges, which gives us 150% of elemental damage taken is recouped as Energy Shield. This is so much recoup that it's actually difficult to see you taking any damage unless you lose your entire ES pool in one hit. The build ended up being significantly tankier than POB showed, and provided you didn't get one shot, you pretty much could tank anything in the game. I'm very tempted to try this again with a Fizz to Cold wand for next league, as Fizz wands have been buffed with the new quality changes that make quality be more local physical damage instead of just increased, and then scaling Hatred and going for a Headhunter. I feel like that would be a competitor for one of the best clear skills in the entire game. This build was cheap, it was fast, it couldn't really kill bosses, so that's really the only knock against it. Even though it did end up with somewhere around 9 million damage, I wouldn't recommend it as a bosser. All in all, it gets a 9.1. My next build ended up being a bit of a meme. It was Volcanic Fissure of Snaking Berserker, where I leaned incredibly heavily into the rage aspect and trying to go as fast as possible. The damage was pretty good, the tankiness was okay, and the speed was phenomenal. But at the end of the day, it wasn't that good of a build for what it would have cost if I didn't get a really good deal on those axes. Necropolis enabled some ridiculous crafting this league, and I was able to buy these 2 axes for under 20 divines combined. Volcanic Fissure of Snaking is a phenomenal skill. I really enjoyed it, but the problem is if you're too fast, you're faster than your fissures. With the removal of the Helm enchant that made the fissures go faster, it actually felt kind of bad to be faster than your fissures, and it made the build feel a little bit slow even though I had a ton of move speed. I also leaned into some Mimi tech, where I was taking 75% of Ellie damage as Chaos, and just went and got Chaos Res, and it was cool, but it wasn't as effective as I would have liked for the amount of effort that went into it. It was a fun build, it was a cool experience, and I'm glad I tried Volcanic Fissure of Snaking, and I would definitely be revisiting that. All in all, I think this gets a 7.5. So another league, another Forbidden Right build for Arrow. I love to revisit this skill with the Stasis Prison Chest. I find it so fun, and people only complain about the price of it once I make a video. This is the 3rd different time I've played it. I've now played it on Assassin, Occultist, and Pathfinder. I think I paid around 17 divines for the chest this time. Of course, once I made my video, the price went up and it seemed unachievable. But the reality is this chest is not expensive at the beginning of a league, but because it's so incredibly rare, the supply runs out really quickly, and anyone making a video with it would make it expensive. The Stasis Prison can only be farmed in the Eternal Emblem Legion Uber version, and even then it's very rare. But this build was phenomenal. We used the Soul Ascension gloves to give us Soul Eater, and I realized that these gloves are completely broken. I'm going to try to fit these onto every single build I can in 3.2.5. They are phenomenal. I'm hoping they don't get nerfed tomorrow. I also leaned really heavily into the Tides of Time belt here. I very much fell in love with this belt after using it in this build. It enables some awesome stuff from Pathfinder. You can get full uptime of pretty much any flask that you want when you use this belt. So we had a very, very high effect per Genesis, which is allowed to tank massive hits. And with all of our recoup, it basically meant any of that damage that came in as dot didn't exist. So high max res, a ton of fizz taken as, crazy recoup. This build was a giga tank that took on all content with ease. Ubers, tier 17 bosses, none of it was a problem. Now, I know there is a Mahaxodal Machination version of this build that does not use Stasis Prison. That is fine. A lot of people are asking me why I wasn't just playing that build. One, because I like to make my own stuff, and two, because I don't want to press my life flask. This build doesn't require you to constantly be pressing a life flask. In fact, it doesn't even use one. You just ramp up your recoup before a boss fight and you run in and you're basically immortal. As always, I highly, highly recommend that you try a build on pretty much any Ascendancy using the Stasis Prison and Self-Cast Forbidden Right. It is a lot of fun. Although it was a bit expensive, this build gets an 8.9. So my next build was originally started as a bit of a meme, but ended up being pretty awesome. So I let my chat vote on a build. Basically what they did was they voted on the elemental damage type, on the attack or spell type, melee, ranged, etc. And it was a tournament style voting until we got down to Tornado of Elemental Turbulence and Inquisitor. So because this was not a build that I elected to play, I decided to take some liberties and try to do some things that I don't normally do. So I stacked up as many defenses as I possibly could in order to make a build that felt like it could not die. It had high block and spell block, Aegis, Fizz taken as, 90 max res, 40,000 armor, Aegis Aurora, and just a massive amount of recovery of ES and life. I was blown away by how much fun the tornadoes were. Now, the tornado does require that you scale a little bit of quality in order for it to feel good if your build is fast. This wasn't the fastest build ever, so I didn't need that much, but combining the tornadoes with Orieth's End and Herald of Ash explosions led to some unbelievably fun screen clear. This build was able to take down Ubers, but it wasn't great for it because I didn't have that much damage. I think I ended around 10 million, but because I invested so heavily into my defense, it was very easy to take on pretty much any fight. And it really was a lot of fun. If I were to play this again, I probably wouldn't invest so heavily into defense and I'd get that damage up a little bit higher. But this was a fun first attempt at a Tornado of Elemental Turbulence build. Due to the cost and the lack of the top end damage, those knocks will send it down to a 8.1. My next build is my build of the league. And it's kind of a combined build because I tried it on a Deadeye and a Trickster, and they both bring their different things to the table. So we'll talk about them both at the same time. The Deadeye is maybe the best mapper that I've ever played. The clear that you can achieve with this build is phenomenal, but it also has the damage to take down bosses. Now I'm going to be league starting the Deadeye version of this build and playing it deep into the endgame. So let's quickly talk about what makes Ice Shot of Penetration amazing. I have an entire video on this, so if you want to, I'll link that in the description. But to give you the brief version, Ice Shot of Penetration fires one projectile, which is the reason that we have to put it on a mine. Targeting one projectile by yourself is completely unfun, and although you could get your damage pretty high, I don't want to aim one projectile. So we put it on a mine to allow the mines to auto-target. With detonation, mines feel better than they ever have, and this actually doesn't play like a mine build. You just right-click out in front of you, it throws the mine, it instantly detonates and automatically targets. It's actually better than a bow build by itself because you don't have to aim in any direction. So that one projectile that is fired from the mine will then seek out an enemy. When it hits that enemy, that's when the Fury Valve kicks in. Normally, Ice Shot can only have one projectile, but the Fury Valve allows it to split when it hits a target. Alongside of Sniper's Mark, we end up getting a ton of splits. All those projectiles fire out at enemies, and then on return, one of those projectiles will hit the original target, but then all of the other projectiles have a chance to hit again if they hit something in the area around it and create the Ice Shot cones. When Ice Shot fires and hits a target, The original ice shot would make a cone behind the enemy, but ice shot of penetration makes 2 cones perpendicular, which means if you get a little bit of quality, you can almost close that gap and make it a perfect circle of AoE around where it hits. That cone can shotgun an unlimited number of times on a single target. So if you have a tornado, a wall, a hydrosphere, another enemy in that range, and it is a big range, all of these can overlap, making for some crazy shotgunning ability. In order to get as many overlaps as possible, we use a Mana Forge setup to recast a tornado over and over again. Every tornado that's placed get hit by a new set of projectiles and can create more and more AoEs. It is hard to describe how good this build feels to play until you get your hands on it. It is one of the most satisfying builds I've ever played that has not only maybe the best clear I've ever experienced, including Tornado Shot, but it also can take down bosses. This build doesn't require a totem, which is one of the things I hate about most bow builds, and has some great quality of life. So, Deadeye versus Trickster. Why is Deadeye better on League Start? Deadeye has access to a lot more speed and a lot more damage than a Trickster does. The Trickster has a lot more defense, but early on in a league, you don't have great gear anyway, and Trickster really scales with great gear. After making POBs on League Start for both, the Deadeye blows the Trickster out of the water in damage because it has access to more projectiles early on when projectiles are at a premium. Every additional projectile is likely at least one more hit that we're going to be able to get on single target. So Deadeye easily wins in the League Start category. This build can absolutely be played as a Trickster. If you're looking for more defense, you can. But for me on League Start, I'm going to be going for offense. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to be all offense. The goal is to get to maybe into the 80s or 90s for Fizz taken as. We're going to be evade capped and maximum spell suppression with ailment immunity, which puts it in the realm of tanky for a Deadeye. Also, once you switch to a Fizz-based version of this build, you will freeze just about every enemy in the game. These freezes can happen off screen. And also, shout out to Snoobe, who stopped by my stream the other day and dropped some cool tech on me. The Painseeker gloves are very underused, but with a Tri-Ellie bow and the Painseeker gloves, you can reliably freeze just about everything, even before you switch to the Fizz to Cold version. So if you're interested in high freeze, make sure you check out those gloves. I ended up playing this build for something like 40 days, which is the longest I think I've ever played a build since I became a content creator, by about a month. It's probably my favorite build of all time. I cannot wait to League Start it, and for that, it's getting a 9.8. Gotta leave a little bit of room for improvement. For my last build of the league, I once again reached out for the Tides of Time belt to scale a bunch of offense and defense, and I played my first Ignite build in a long time. It was Blade Blast of Dagger Detonation Ignite Elementalist. I made a perfect Fizz dagger in the graveyard, which I then used Fizz to Cold, Cold to Fire to get as big of ignites as I could. Then we used some really juiced up Flask. We had a Progenesis, Taste of Hate, Oriath Send, all which scale with the quality or with the increased effect on the belt. This character got to over 100 Fizz taken as, so it was also bleed immune, and it felt very tanky. The problem that I had with this build was the same problem that I had with the Tornado build, which is I only got to about 10 million damage. The clear was absolutely insane, but 10 million damage for me isn't enough to reliably farm bosses. So even though it was super tanky and basically couldn't die in tier 16s, in tier 17s you ended up having to fight bosses for a long time. We used some pretty cool tech on this build. It was a double Fizz taken as Cult and Halt, which gives max cold res, and Fizz as extra. We ended up using just about everything on this shield, and it is actually a pretty good replacement for an Aegis because of how cheap it is if you're not scaling armor. So we got to 90 max res. We used a Melding of the Flesh in order to scale that cold res up, and this build was truly a giga tank. But at the end of the day, the damage was not as high as I wanted it to be, so that knocks it down a few pegs. I'm going to give this one an 8.3. That said, Blade Blast of Dagger Detonation is an unbelievably powerful skill that can be used in a number of ways. This is my second time playing with it, and I highly recommend that you check it out. So that is it for my builds for 3.24. I know it's a short list. I'm desperately hoping that 325 can reignite the fire inside of me to create more builds, but we're going to start with Ice Shot of Penetration Deadeye. I will be live for patch notes tomorrow on my Twitch, twitch.tv/AER0__. Definitely going to want to check that out. It is 4 p.m. Eastern time. If you like this content and want to support me, you can like, comment down below, and subscribe to the channel. Thank you all for watching. I appreciate each and every one of you. And as always, take care.